on the horizon. How would you enjoy that cash? £50,000 will make someone our biggest ever winner. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth,
it's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The UK has announced £50 million of humanitarian aid for vulnerable Syrians across the Middle East after the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad's regime. The Foreign Office says the emergency support will be delivered through the UN and NGO agencies to people in the country, as well as to refugees in Lebanon and Jordan. Britain yesterday joined talks in Aqaba, hosted by Jordan and attended by ministers and delegates. They agreed on the importance of a non-sectarian and representative government protecting human rights and the safe destruction of chemical weapons and combating terrorism. The intervention comes a week after the collapse of the Assad regime following an offensive by rebel group HTS.
We want to see a Syrian-led and a Syrian-owned future, and we want one that is representative and inclusive. That is what partners in the region and allies, close allies, signed up to yesterday, and that's what we'll be encouraging.
In other news, Labour has claimed a record pace for removing migrants from the UK, but channel crossings are still at an all-time high. The Home Office says nearly 13,500 people have been removed since Labour's election win in July. That's the most in any 6-month period since 2019. However, the number of channel crossings continues to rise, with over 21,000 migrants arriving by small boat, including a record 609 on Thursday. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says Labour is intensifying border security and cracking down on illegal working. However, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch says it's Labour who are failing to control our borders.
I'm not going to run away from the subject of immigration. I never have. Labour are pretending that they're tough on immigration when actually they stopped us from doing quite a lot of things. It wasn't just the fact that we had a majority in the Commons. We did not have a majority in the Lords. So a lot of legislation, the Rwanda legislation, even when we were putting it through, it was getting blocked elsewhere. So I'm not going to have Keir Starmer, who wanted foreign criminals to stay in this country, actively stop them from being deported, pretend that he is Mr. Immigration.
And a tribunal has ruled that an alleged Chinese spy linked to the Duke of York and 2 former prime ministers posed a national security risk. The businessman, known only as H6, was barred from the UK last year after reportedly infiltrating high-profile circles, including attending events with David Cameron and Theresa May. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says Britain must maintain economic ties with China, but will act strongly against security threats. Critics, including Nigel Farage, are calling for the man to be named. The Duke of York insists, meanwhile, that no sensitive matters were ever discussed, and he says all contact stopped following government advice. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More news from me in an hour.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. It's been another busy week in Westminster. Earlier this week, I sat down with the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, for an exclusive interview. We cover everything from migration caps, the ECHR, Nigel Farage, of course, and her recent trip to the US. You won't want to miss it. Labour MP for Brent West, Barry Gardiner, will join me. I'm going to be asking him whether Wes Streeting was right to criticise Ed Miliband over his failure to back military action in Syria in 2013. We'll also reflect on 5 months of Labour in government, and of course I'll have to ask Barry Gardiner about the Chinese spying scandal. Reform UK Chairman Zia Yusuf will be live in the studio. I'll be getting his reaction to my interview with Kemi Badenoch. Is she right to say that Reform UK is just a Nigel Farage fan club? Barry Gardiner is with us, I hope. Mr. Gardiner, can you hear me all right? The Labour MP for Brent West.
Sorry, parliamentary security was blocking me from getting into you.
Barry, I'm glad that parliamentary security is keeping us and your own line safe. Now, let's have a little chat. We were just speaking, Madeline Grant and I, about Labour's VAT on private school fees plan. So we now have military families saying that they might have to leave military service because of this plan. We've got Eton saying it's cancelling its bursaries, which, as you know, help disadvantaged pupils to have private education at that top boys' school. And we've also got Surrey saying we've got no places left in state schools because of the private school exodus. Barry Gardiner, you've been around the block a little bit. You know politics very well. This is a disastrous policy that probably should be U-turned on, shouldn't it?
No, not at all, because what it is going to mean is that children starting off school in primary school will start each day with a square meal in their belly. And that is so important, Camilla, because, you know, so many kids actually find it very difficult to concentrate because they haven't had breakfast. They've been hiked out of bed, dashed to the school in the morning. You know, Barry, it's been a rush job and they're hungry and they can't focus. So
Barry, isn't it a parent's job? Sorry, isn't it a parent's job to give a child breakfast in the morning and not teachers in the schools? What happened to parental responsibility for making sure that children don't go to school hungry?
Camilla, look, you know, if we lived in a perfect world, that would be fine. But in actual fact, at the moment, private schools are getting relief on their taxes, which is because they claim to be charities, but they're not charities, they're businesses. So let's treat them as other businesses. They make money, they do well, that's fine. You know, but let's treat them as businesses and let them say, okay, fine, we will therefore make sure that we pay the correct tax, just like every other business in the country.
Okay. All right, so you're OK with the idea of people leaving the military, even though the armed forces are now at their smallest since the Napoleonic Wars, and you're OK with disadvantaged pupils not being able to get subsidised places at Eton, and you're OK with there being a private school exodus into state schools in Surrey so that they're now overcrowded and oversubscribed. That's all OK?
if I thought that all of those three things were going to happen en masse, then we might have a problem. I don't think that's true.
They've been reported
in fact,
to happen.
If you think that many military families, if they are stationed abroad, their children are paid for in the schools that they go to. Now, there may be some who are not paid for because they choose to go to very expensive schools, but actually, if you need your children to be taken care of and schooled because you're abroad, that's something that is covered by the military. If you're talking about, a mass exodus from private schools, I don't think that's going to happen. And in fact, all the data that we have suggests that it's not, and that the full 20% may not be passed on.
Well, the IFS disagrees and says that there could be an exodus of between 40,000 and 90,000 children. But let's see what happens when the policy comes in January. Barry, do you mind if I ask you about this Chinese spying scandal? Because obviously we know, and it was reported, that you had your own situation with Christine Lee. You accepted 600,000 and you said, I'm very angry that somebody tried to use me in that way, which is similar to some of the language that's been used by sources close to the Duke of York, saying, of course, he had no idea.
Camilla, let's be very clear. In the case of the CRG, that is the China Research Group, which was set up by Tom Tugendhat, which was a conservative think tank. There are two people who have now been charged with offences under the Security Act. Now, those individuals were employed and paid for by the conservative think tank. In my case, Christine Lee, who had been a friend for many, many years, has not been charged with any offence. She was never been charged with any offence, and in fact, she is now taking MI5 to court for besmirching her good name. Now, on top of that, she wasn't paid for by money from my party or any other party, or indeed by government. She actually paid for people who were members of my staff, who were appointed by me, reported to me, and had no official contact with her whatsoever, in order for me to do a better job for my constituents. So it's a completely different situation. And now we're talking about this person who wants access to Prince Andrew. I don't know the details of that. I know that there have allegations been made which sound as if this is somebody who was trying to seek to ingratiate themselves in some way with people of influence. But we've no more information about who it was or indeed what they were trying to do.
OK, so are you saying you don't think Christine Lee is a Chinese spy?
Well, it's very interesting. I was led to believe that on the day that MI5 issued their warning by MI5. They said she was an agent. They then didn't say she was a spy. After that, the Home Secretary, you'll remember, had to say she was an agent of influence. She sought to be an agent of influence. She wasn't. According to them, she was not a spy. Now, that's why I think she is now taking a case against MI5 for what they did to her and her company. But
she did him.
That's not the issue here. The issue here is about Prince Andrew, isn't it? Sorry?
She did hand over 600 grand, though. But but I'm asking about this.
Let's be absolutely clear. Very clear, Camilla, because I've already sued one media company successfully on this.
Yes.
I did not take a penny personally from Christine Lee.
No, I know. I'm saying she paid.
No, but let's be clear. She paid for people who were doing work which was for the benefit of my constituents and for the country. Sure. Okay, she paid them. The case that we're looking at with the conservative, the China Research Group, which was set up by Tom Tugendhat, a defense minister, and by Alicia Cairns, who was the secretary of, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. They were paying those two who have now been charged under the Official Secrets Act. So there's a huge difference. And yet, you know, it seems to be that go on.
I'm trying to, because the point I'm trying to make here, Barry, is it's tricky, this. I appreciate exactly what you're saying about who she's given the 600 grand to, as opposed to this new case. But you aren't sure still. She's fighting the case in court. You aren't sure whether she is a Chinese spy, as was alleged. We've got a situation where the Duke of York said they had no idea.
I am clear that the Home Secretary at the time said that she was not being accused of spying. She was accused of trying to use influence. And it was not illegal. Nothing that she did, as far as I understand, and as far as the Home Secretary at the time, Priti Patel, understood, was illegal at all. It was all also for the benefit of the public good. She giving to pay for people who were working for the public benefit, rather than two people who have now been charged with spying from the Conservative Party, who actually were then paying them. There's a big difference.
I understand. No, I understand. Barry Gardiner, we need to leave it there because we've run out of time.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Well, it's interesting because I haven't actually been told specifically what I've done, which has resulted in me being removed from my committee position, which was head of daytime. I started a podcast in September in which I interviewed Charlie Bentley-Astor, who's a detransitioner. I then also interviewed Graham Linehan and I wrote an article for his Substack. And shortly after that, I was told that I had been suspended and the university union started an investigation into me. And that very quickly became apparent to me that it was an interrogation of my gender-critical views rather than any sort of misconduct that I had been alleged to.
Right. And Graham Linehan has been outspoken on issues relating to transgender ism, whatever you want to call it, gender ideology. And so perhaps just by having associated yourself with him as a controversial figure, that was why the investigation happened, you suspect?
Yes, and already it's quite clear that guilt by association is a crime that you can commit within university societies. I actually purchased my free speech union membership way before this all happened, when a friend helped me edit the episode with Charlie, and he got in trouble with a separate society who told him that he must disassociate himself from me, and if he didn't, further measures would be taken. So at that point, I thought, well, I better put some damage control in place and purchase my membership in case anything happens to me.
So this decision is made by the student union, right? Is that made up of fellow students? Or who's making this call?
Well, that's actually part of my appeal. So the process has been completely improper. They haven't followed their own guidelines. There are two different guidelines as to whether a complaint is dealt with the society itself, so Leeds Student Radio, or the union. And it's basically been a mishmash of both. So it's been an improper procedure. But it is, as far as I'm aware, it's the student union who's decided to remove me.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Lots more still to come this morning. My exclusive interview with Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch after she returned from her trip to the US. I spoke to her at her office in Westminster, and here's the first part of our interview.
Kemi Badenoch, thank you very much for joining me on my GB News show this morning. Lovely to see you. So you addressed the International Democracy Union Conference in America, in Washington, in fact, where you said this: "I believe my party lost because it spent a lot of time talking right but governing left. Are you in danger, though, of talking down your party too much to the electorate?
No. I think it is important that we acknowledge where we went wrong. Pretending that we didn't lose or that the electorate was wrong, in my view, would not be how we win back the public's trust. When I stood for party leader, I said the first thing we needed to do was to show that we could be trusted again. So not just making new promises or throwing out new policies, but explaining to the public where we went wrong, but not just where we went wrong, but why things went wrong. Because if you don't look at the why, you'll repeat the same mistakes. And that's what that speech was drawing out, why things are going wrong.
The GB News audience will think that you went wrong in 3 specific areas. You went wrong on tax because the tax burden became the biggest since the Second World War, and they appreciate COVID's role in that, but they will think it was distinctly unconservative. They'll think that you went wrong in your net zero pledges, which are now coming back to bite us all, not least with the closure of the car plant at the Vauxhall car plant in Luton. But predominantly, they will say that you went wrong on immigration. And that's why you have struggled at Prime Minister's questions to tackle Keir Starmer on immigration, because everybody knows that this was 14 years of Tory failure.
So let's start off with net zero. You will remember that when the net zero pledges were announced, I was one of only 2 MPs who actually said, what are we doing? Where is the plan? We believe that we need to make sure we give a good environment for the next generation, but that needs to be done in a way that doesn't bankrupt the country. And one of the things that people know I did was fight in government to hold back many of the plans, which even business and others were saying, yes, it's fine, we'll do this, we'll just get stuff from China. And I think that shows how I think about things. I tell people that I'm an engineer, you've got to have a proper plan, not just make promises and then hope things will work themselves out later. On tax, as you mentioned, yes, we had COVID, but we are also spending so much more. And there's a difficult conversation to be had about what the state needs to spend money on. It's not just about public services. And we all saw what happened a couple of years ago when Liz Truss tried to remove taxes without removing, to reduce taxes without reducing spending. Those are some of the things that we're going to be working on over the next few years. But on immigration, I'm not going to run away from the subject of immigration. I never have. Labour are pretending that they're tough on immigration when actually they stopped us from doing quite a lot of things. It wasn't just the fact that we had a majority in the Commons. We did not have a majority in the Lords. So a lot of legislation, the Rwanda legislation, even when we were putting it through, it was getting blocked elsewhere. So I'm not going to have Keir Starmer, who wanted foreign criminals to stay in this country, actively stop them from being deported, pretend that he is Mr. Immigration. Yes, we got things wrong. We tried to deliver a points-based system when we left the EU. We tried to deliver a points-based system. It clearly did not work. So let's fix that. But we were not the ones making all of those applications, but we were not keeping an eye on the ball. And that is where I will say that we got things wrong. But we are the only party that understands why this system is broken. And so we are the only party that can fix immigration.
Because the trouble was, I think John Reid back in the day when he was a Labour Home Secretary said that the Home Office was a basket case. And even post that, you know, the rest of the Labour administration into successive Conservative governments. I appreciate what you're saying about stopping the boats and indeed the deterrent that the Rwanda plan may well have been. But it's the concern about legal migration. We've seen it even this week with Labour addressing the housing shortage with the pledge of 1.5 million homes. The GB audience feels terribly let down by the Conservatives not keeping a lid on legal migration. Those pledges, tens of thousands, everyone remembers it from David Cameron onwards. So it's how are you going to manoeuvre the Tories out of that? Because you can't attack Labour on legal migration. You're as bad as they are.
I'm afraid that is not true. Yes, we can. And that is by pointing to people all the things that we did do that did make a difference. I'm not here to say that everything worked out, but I need to make sure that people know the truth about what actually happened. When we were cracking down on migration, do you remember people attacking Theresa May about the go-home vans? Do you remember them attacking her about the hostile environment? When we were being very serious, people got spooked. The problem we have is that when anyone actually tries to manage migration, they get attacked. And that spooks a lot of people, some politicians, not me, I'm not worried about that. A lot of people in the Home Office, you see them even putting on their message boards that they don't want to do this. A Director General from the Home Office left to go work for Amnesty International, to help asylum seekers. That's great, but that's charity work. That's not controlling borders work. And that is why I keep telling people that we are the only party who has seen the system from the inside and understand how to fix it. Labour don't want to fix it. Reform can't fix it. They don't know how. Goodness knows what the Lib Dems are thinking.
We'll get on to reform in a moment. You have moved, I think, during the leadership campaign, you didn't want to go as far as to say that you wanted to put a cap on migration, but you are now saying that. Is that an accurate representation?
Yes, what I said during the leadership contest, that a cap on its own is not enough, that numbers matter. So yes, a cap, but culture matters more. Who is coming into the country? How are we integrating them? How are we making sure that the people who come to this country care about it? This is not a hostel, it's not a dormitory, this is our home, and then making sure that the leadership follows through. So a cap is something that we can do. What I don't do is just make random promises without explaining where it's all going to come from. So I said that a cap will be needed, but what was that cap going to be? Let's work out what we can sustain. We're going to need to have a very systemic review. How many homes should we be building? What makes sense? What is happening to our population? Where do we need skills? And make sure that migration is controlled. Where the points-based system went wrong was that we thought by putting in those points, it would be fine. I campaigned, in fact, in 2018, before we left the EU, where we couldn't manage our borders, that let's have skilled migration and not cap that, because that's what my constituents were telling me. The businesses in my constituency said, we can't get high-skilled people, can you help? And I did that. But when we saw that it wasn't working, I said, no, this is not good enough. We've got to do better. Let's change things. Let's start talking about what the courts are doing. So we can do a lot on immigration if we're given the chance, but the first thing we need to do is earn trust. And that is why, no matter how tough it is, I will make sure that I hold the Prime Minister to account on immigration at PMQs. We are the opposition, and we've got a job to do, and I'm going to make sure that we do that job.
So you don't want to put the number on the cap now?
Well, what would that number mean?
Well, you tell me exactly. Well, let's use a comparison, because the OBR and the IFS seem to be baking in this idea that legal migration can remain at around 350,000 a year. We saw that record high in the end of 2023, up to 950,000, which I think everybody can agree is way, way too high. But that base number seems to be creeping up and up.
Exactly.
So is 350,000 too many?
So what I'm saying is that we need to work out what the country can sustain and where people are coming from. If we start saying, oh, well, we'll just do tens of thousands, like David Cameron said in 2010, and then it doesn't work out, people think that we are being dishonest. Let's explain where the number comes from. Let's explain why. And that is work that needs to be done. No one ever does this work. Even the OBR, where it's picking its figures from, that's not a serious systemic analysis of what to do.
What does your gut tell you about 350,000?
My gut tells me that immigration right now is too high. My gut tells me that immigration even 10 years ago is probably too high with no integration strategy. But we are living in an era of global mass migration. It is not just the UK. I've been to Italy, I've been to Australia, I've been to the US, Germany. Everybody is having these problems. We have to think about how we deal with this new world problem. This problem did not start because of Conservatives. It's happening everywhere. We were in government when it started. We've got to figure it out. Otherwise, we will lose control completely. And I do not want to see that happen. I will do everything I can to make sure that that does not happen.
One dividing line between you and your former opponent, Robert Jenrick, was that he said he wanted to commit to leaving the ECHR, and you said you wanted to have a further think about it. Where are you on that right now?
So I have said that leaving the ECHR is not a silver bullet. We need to remember that we've just had a historic defeat. Labour has almost 4 times as many MPs as we do. They have a supermajority. It doesn't matter what policies we rush out with now. Even if 100 Labour MPs disappeared, they would still be in government. That is the reality. So me talking about what we'll do now when we haven't done our homework is not realistic. I keep telling people I'm an engineer. If you want a plan, you don't just talk, you build, you think, you analyze, and then people can see how it comes together. So on the ECHR, I've said that it alone will not fix anything. If we leave the ECHR today, we're still not going to be deporting people. You've got to deal with the personnel problem. You look at Labour, you look at Keir Starmer, there are people like that all over this country. They're not going to man the borders. Let's get new people in who want to do this job. There's a lot of thinking to be done, and that's what I'm going to be doing over the next few years.
You can accept for the GB audience that it's more attractive, if you're really concerned about immigration, to look at Nigel Farage promising net zero migration with exceptions for healthcare and other key sectors, and departing from the ECHR on day one.
What I would say to GB News viewers is, aren't you tired of people who just make promises without telling you how they're going to get them, if I may, without telling you how they're going to get them done? I remember watching clips of Nigel Farage saying that he wanted to see more immigration from Africa, wanted to see more immigration from India. He's not saying that anymore. If he was an MP, there'd be clips of him saying these things. We are people who are serious. When we make mistakes, we acknowledge them. Labour pretends it doesn't make mistakes. Mr. Farage is talking, but he does not have the experience. We do. So what I'm saying to your viewers is there is only one party that has the experience, that knows what went wrong and knows how to solve this, and that's the Conservatives.
Well, there you have it. Much more to come from my interview with Kemi next, including what she makes of President-elect Trump, the threat from Reform UK, and what she hopes to do as Tory leader. Do not move a muscle. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
Hello there, very good evening. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Hope you have had a good evening, although we have started to see a band of rain push its way into northern and western areas of Scotland. Some quite squally winds around this evening as this continues to move its way in. It will turn quite persistent for western areas of Scotland, in particular the Highlands, seeing a lot of rainfall during this forthcoming night. Generally drier further towards the south, but quite a lot of cloud around. Blustery still in amongst all of that. Those southwesterly winds filtering in, some quite mild air, so most of us will hold up around 9 or 11 degrees Celsius as you start off Monday morning. This rain band will still be in place throughout much of the day on Monday, and so really we will see those rainfall totals really tossing up, potentially half a month's worth of rain quite widely across areas of western Scotland. Snow melt as well underneath those mild temperatures will provide further flooding impacts in places as well, so do take care, and a rain warning is in force. Generally though, for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales as well, we will hopefully start to see the cloud break up a touch more compared to what we have seen today, and so more of us should see some of those brighter, maybe even sunnier spells developing at times over the course of the day. We do still have that brisk wind around in places though, still coming in from that southwesterly direction, so temperatures around 9 to 12 degrees Celsius once again, even by day, but that blustery wind will just take the edge off the feel of things a touch when you are stepping outside at times. Into Tuesday, we've got another area of low pressure that is going to be moving its way in, steadily pushing its way in from parts of the southwest. Again, this will be bringing some further strong winds, particularly gales around coastal areas in the west, but also further bands of rain, potentially heavy at times, perhaps mostly affecting Northern Ireland and then steadily pushing its way into Scotland. England and Wales, still the risk of some showers around, but you've got the greater chance of seeing a few sunnier or brighter spells in there at times. Still though, those strong winds coming in from the south going to field in those milder conditions, but a change in wind direction later in the week means that we will start to see those temperatures dropping down a touch, much cooler for all of us. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. More for my interview with Kemi Badenoch now. We discuss what she makes of Donald Trump and JD Vance, and I asked her if a pact with Nigel Farage might be on the cards. Here's what she had to say.
We will get on to Farage and reform again a bit later, but tell me about your trip to the US. So you also met with Conservative former leaders, including former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott. You met with Pierre Poilievre, who is hoping to defeat Justin Trudeau at the next election in Canada. You also met with Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. What kind of conversations did you have with them?
So Tony Abbott, I've known for a while, and he actually endorsed me in the run-up to in the leadership contest. And he was talking about bringing back more authentic conservatism. He is a net zero skeptic, as am I. I know that climate change is happening. I believe that we need to look after our environment. I am suspicious of the net zero plans that Ed Miliband has. I even thought our plans were going too far. Thankfully, we were able to row back on that. So we talked a lot about that. Pierre Poilievre, I thought, was amazing. He's so impressive, and he is about 4 years ahead of me in terms of where he is in the electoral cycle. He is the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada, but he's in opposition, and he is part of what I see as a new generation of Conservatives who are coming forwards. We're not the past. We've taken our principles from, previous Conservatives, but we need to mold those principles for the age that we're in. The world is changing, and that's the conversation that I had at dinner with J.D. Vance, who he was messaging me during our election, and I was doing the same, about how people don't understand how the world is changing. And we often have, a lot of media commentary about, Kamala Harris is going to win, and your opponent is going to win. People talking you down without actually looking at what you're saying. Conservatives constantly being caricatured. And I want to make sure that people understand what it is that we're about, what we believe in, because if you vote for a party, it's got to be because there's an emotional connection, not just because of promises. People need to know that you are for them. And that's what I'm offering right now. The Conservative Party is under new leadership. And what I'm doing is showing that we are based on principles that the rest of the country shares. Belief in freedom, in genuine citizenship, not just passport citizenship, in the importance of family, in equality under the law, not dividing people into groups, and all of this left-wing nonsense that we see. And I'm going to keep pushing that.
Have you had a conversation yet with Donald Trump?
No.
And, well, how would you like to develop that relationship with the man who's going to be president for the second time come January?
Well, I'm quite excited about what a Trump presidency will bring. I'm someone who's been writing endlessly about how we are becoming more bureaucratic as a country, rather than entrepreneurial. I've written papers, I've given speeches on this, and Doge is basically what I have been talking about. Javier Milei in Argentina also has this thesis that the Western world has just become bogged down in compliance and bureaucracy. So it'll be interesting to see how President Trump gets on with Doge and with those plans, because that's what I want to do. It's what I've always wanted to do, even as business secretary, when I put out papers on smarter regulation and I cut, audit regulations. These are things that we can do in order to get our economy booming again.
Now, with that guise, and in that guise of being former business secretary and trade secretary, do you think that it is possible for the UK and the US to strike a trade deal? How could that work?
Well, we are entering CPTPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Deal with Asian countries, but also Canada, Mexico, Australia. And it's going to be amazing. We should be striking more free trade agreements. We have one with the EU. It is working well, but the US would be the big prize. And when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, we had been negotiating. We were halfway through negotiations when Boris Johnson and President Trump were both running the respective countries. When Biden came in, that got scrapped, so we had to put those plans on the shelf. Right now, with a new Trump presidency, what Keir Starmer should be doing is chasing that US free trade agreement, and we will certainly be pushing for that.
And do you not worry that that might be a further blow to British farmers who might be worried about the import of much cheaper American meat? We know they're already on their knees. We saw them at the tractor protest again this week in Westminster. It could be a blow if Conservatives don't seem to be standing up for people working in the British countryside.
We will always stand up for farmers. And actually, if you look at the CPTPP deal, which I negotiated, the NFU said this is a great deal. Because it's not just about food coming in, it's also about the ability to export our food more cheaply. If you have tariffs, then you can't sell your food abroad. And we need to be able to make sure that we get our food into the markets across the world because it's of the highest quality. The key thing is to make sure that you sign a deal that works for both countries, not one that is lopsided. And I think that only Conservatives will do that. There is a lot that we can share. Trade deals are mostly about services these days rather than just goods. We are an 80% services economy. That's where a lot of our growth will come from. But we will always protect British farmers. I have said that we're going to reverse the family farms tax. I think that it is important that people understand why farmers are special. They really are. There's no other job like this. You don't just find farmers at the job centre. Once they go, it's very, very difficult to bring back what it is that's been lost.
Some of the farmers were upset that you didn't mention their plight at PMQs this week. They were in Parliament at the time. They could hear what was going on. Equally, have you ceded sort of the argument in favour of farmers to Nigel Farage? He's in the middle of it all in his wellies. Jeremy Clarkson's also been a poster boy for the farmers. That should be your role, shouldn't it?
Yes, but I was on the stage at the first rally with Jeremy Clarkson and everybody wrote about that. I've also mentioned farmers at every other PMQs. So just this once, when people said, oh, why isn't she talking about immigration? I talked about immigration and people said, why aren't you talking about farmers? You only get 6 questions at PMQs. And I wanted to make sure that Keir Starmer understood that if he wants to talk about immigration and attack us, I will drag his record out so that people can see that he was on the side of criminals, not the people of the United Kingdom. And one of the other things is that the farming campaign is not yet over. There's a lot more that we will be doing because these are constituencies which we have always supported and which we always will.
How are you finding PMQs?
It's very different from being on the other side. I'm used to answering questions. So asking questions for me is limiting. I want to ask more and more. And what was really interesting about my conversation with Pierre Poilievre was that he does Prime Minister's questions as well, because the Canadian system is like ours. But he gets 24 questions, and it's just him rather than all the backbenchers. I said, I'd love 24. And he said, I couldn't do anything with just 6 questions, that you're just getting going with 6 questions. So it's a tricky thing to do, to make sure that you can tell a story with 6 questions. But what I want at PMQs is for people to understand the difference between Conservatives and Labour. For too long, people didn't understand what the difference between us was. I think that was wrong. We are very different parties, and it is time that the British public understood what real, authentic conservatism looks like.
Are you taking the fight to Starmer enough? Only because some people have remarked in Conservative circles, you've got this reputation for being a bit of a street fighter. You've said yourself you're extremely direct. And is there a sense to which you're slightly playing Queensberry rules across the dispatch box and you could be a bit more aggressive? Not least because, let's be honest, the Prime Minister's been on the ropes for some time.
Yes, he has been on the ropes. But I need to make sure that I am building the case for Conservatives. People think I like a fight. I don't like a fight, but I will defend our values. I am somebody who fights for other people. I speak up for others. I don't just rush out attacking for attacking's sake. And, you know, if you look at the questions that we've asked, it's about all of those business that are being crushed by the national insurance charges. It is about farmers, who we've just spoken about. It's about pensioners who are suffering under what Rachel Reeves has done with her budget, taking away winter fuel. So I fight for people. I don't just attack Starmer for attacking sake. I think I think we need to make sure that we show whose side we're on, not just turn it into an argy-bargy.
But are you in danger of being in a kind of sandwich, goodness me, what a way to describe it, between Keir Starmer and indeed Nigel Farage? You know, Reform have seemed to have the momentum lately, pardon the expression, because that's associated with left-wing Labour politics. But you've had the defection of Tim Montgomery, the founder of Con Home, somebody that you and I are both very familiar with in right-wing circles. You've had the defection of Nick Candy, who has got quite a few bob. He's going to now donate to Reform rather than the Conservatives. You've got Elon Musk, the ex and Tesla owner, talking about maybe giving $100 million to Reform. And you've got Nigel Farage, you know, very, very prominent on social media. He's just clocked up, I think, his millionth TikTok supporter. Dame Andrea Jenkins has gone across. There's talk about Suella Braverman, or at least her husband, following. The momentum does seem to be with the Reform and not the Tories. And people are talking about the Tories facing this existential crisis.
Right. So let's take each of those in turn. Tim Montgomery has left the party before. He left in 2016. You talked about Nick Candy. He defected to Labour in February and has now gone to Reform. Technically, he's a Labour defection. Andrea Jenkins, I'm sure if you've seen comments that she'd made, they were very personal about me. So I think it's just a personality decision. She just doesn't like who the leader is. I'm who I'm always going to be, and I'm very proud of who I am. But we need to remember that I've been in charge for 5 weeks, and we are taking a party that has been in government for 14 years. It's going to take time. The assumption that after 14 years, we're just going to, just put a lick of paint on it and say, ta-da, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a long slog. I am here for the long haul. I'm not here just to make a few quick speeches and throw gimmicks out. People won't believe it. People need to know that they can trust us. And what they want to see is someone being a credible and effective opposition, making sure that I'm standing up for conservative values and those people, farmers, pensioners, small businessmen, all those people who've been hurt by Labour's budget, but also rebuilding our institution. I am about the institution of the Conservative Party. Nigel Farage is an individual personality. He doesn't even have a membership organisation.
They're saying they've got 100,000 members now, and that they might overtake the Tories.
They say that, but what can they do as members? My members have a say. They're part of the organisation. I have to look after them. They're not my fan club. They are people that I have a responsibility to. We are a serious institution. Yes, we have come out of a historic defeat. We're going to have to pick ourselves up. But that's not going to happen in 5 weeks or 5 months. It's going to take the full time in opposition.
Final question. You said in your speech to the IDU that there's no cavalry coming, there's just us. David Frost has talked about the need for the right to unite. Because if Reform and the Tories don't come to some kind of deal or pact eventually, you know what's going to happen. Labour will ride on through the middle and win a second term in office, which nobody on the right wants. So further down the track, I appreciate this is a marathon, not a sprint. Don't conversations need to be taking place between the Tories and Reform?
Well, I think it is important that you ensure that your identity is very clear. We have had a period where even within the Conservative Party, there has been a lot of disagreement. These are the things that I'm working through. You can see that we're more united than ever. But when you have had internal disagreements, the first thing you don't do is bring in a whole other bunch of people and say, well, why don't we merge with them? And also, the public want to know what they're voting for. There are a lot of people who vote Conservative who will not vote Conservative if we merge with Reform. We need to be the very best Conservative Party, not trying to nick bits of here or there. In the same way that I wouldn't be talking to Ed Davey and saying, well, there's some people who vote Lib Dem who might vote Conservative, why don't we merge? I won't do the same with Nigel Farage. I haven't been elected as leader of the Conservative Party to do a deal with Nigel Farage. I have been elected as the leader to fix this Conservative Party and get us back to where we were as the champion of Conservative values, and that's what I'm going to do.
Kemi Badenoch, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thank you.
Fighting talk there from Kemi Badenoch. Thank you to the opposition leader for sitting down with me earlier this week. Coming up next and reacting to what she had to say is the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Yusuf. He'll be in the studio live shortly. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The way in which children are being driven online because we're not taking them seriously offline. And what we're tending to do is seeing the problems entirely on the social media, forgetting the fact that we've given up on children being able to work independently and play independently outdoors. We've basically created a world where the digital bedroom has become this go-to area for a lot of young kids. We've given up on old-fashioned parenting, where we try to cultivate their resilience. And now we blame everything, all the problems that occur online. You have to remember that if you take something like bullying, bullying, doesn't have to only take place online. It happens all the time, offline, in everyday life. But yet we only see the problem on the social media. And there's this obsession with the social media where every single problem that afflicts childhood is blamed on it. And that distracts us from actually understanding what we're doing wrong with children. So for me, And I hate when I see children with digital technology, when I see them with smartphones. I'm not a fan. I'm much more concerned about the fact that parents, use their digital phones when they're having dinner with their kids and giving very bad examples in relation to that. But the real problem, it seems to me, is offline, and that's why we've got to crack the issue. So for me, the banning issue is entirely a headline-grabbing political gambit. And I think that we should be much more focused on the real problems rather than delude ourselves that anything will improve.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm joined now by the Chairman of Reform UK, Zia Yusuf. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for coming into the GB News studio. You watched the Kemi Badenoch interview. What's your reaction?
Well, something that has afflicted the Tories now for a long time is to really insult the British electorate's intelligence. People watching that interview must have been amazed to hear, for example, that the Tories should now be trusted on immigration because they have experience in immigration. That's like an arsonist turning up at your house, which is ablaze, demanding the opportunity to put it out on the basis that they had the experience of starting it. The Tories, in manifesto after manifesto, promised to bring net migration to tens of thousands, left office with that number at almost 1 million. The Tories are the ones who brought net zero legislation into being, enshrined it into law. She claimed in that interview that she was the one standing up to net zero legislation. Go and look at the records. Just last year, she voted for the Energy Act, which Claire Coutinho, the net zero secretary, remember it was the Tories who introduced a net zero secretary in the first place, she called it the most significant energy legislation in the country's history. Kemi Badenoch voted for it. Okay. So the idea that she was some lone voice protesting against the disastrous policies that the Tories implemented, that's nonsense. She was in the cockpit with a hand on the throttle, chartering a course towards the cliff edge.
All right. So her counter reaction to that will no doubt be, look, we were in office and you can try and do things like the Reform Party have in their contract with the people to have net zero migration, for instance. Actually, in practice, that proves quite difficult when you've got people in the healthcare sector and indeed hospitality saying, you can't have net zero migration, it won't work because we need staff from overseas to fund our businesses. And then equally, you could say that because you haven't got any experience of governing, you've just really been a campaign party, that reality will hit you firmly when you get into office and realise that the civil service and the so-called blob is trying to pull against everything that you try and do.
Well, this is once again the Tories propagating the lie that is told to British people time and again that they have to put up with open borders and an exploding population, otherwise the health service would collapse. You could replace every single doctor and nurse in the National Health Service with 6 months of last year's net migration. And on top of that, if you actually look at the numbers on net non-EU migration over the last 6 years, of which there were 3.1 million people who arrived illegally, just 16% of those people arrived on work visas.
Yeah.
This is a complete lie. And it's the reason why Kemi Badenoch can never hold Keir Starmer to account on immigration, because we all know that their record was a disaster and they lied to the British public time and again.
Although she's right to point out in immigration that Nigel Farage was once advocating more immigration from Commonwealth countries like India and indeed African countries to replace free movement of people across the EU.
Nigel has been in politics for 3 decades. Nigel was not in government. He was not in the cabinet, as I said, with his hand on the throttle, chartering a course for this country towards the cliff edge. I want to say one other thing as well. To be fair to Kemi Badenoch, whoever the Tory leader is, there is a physics problem, an insoluble physics problem at the heart of the Conservative Party. Half of the party are basically Lib Dems, and poll after poll shows this. We all know it's true. And the other half are small C Conservatives that basically agree with us. Many are now realising that and joining us. You know, these are people like Tim Montgomery. I encourage anyone watching this who is in that situation, please come to your senses and come join us, because we are reconstituting the centre-right of politics in this country. But the reality is, no matter who the leader is of the Conservative Party, they will always have to put the majority of their cognitive capacity into just remaining as leader. One of the reasons why Kemi Badenoch, for example, refused during the leadership campaign to commit to leaving the ECHR like Robert Jenrick did was, of course, it's not the silver bullet, and it is, but it is a necessary, albeit insufficient step. The reason she wouldn't do it, to use her own words, was it would divide her party.
How about this idea of Elon Musk giving the party $100 million? Can we just get some clarity on this? Where did this story come from? Must have come from someone in Reform, mustn't it? How did it end up on the front page of the Sunday Times? Because everyone seems to be disowning it. Oh, we don't know where this has come from. Oh, where could it have come from, Mr. Yusuf?
Well, I'm not privy to the Sunday Times sources. I can tell you categorically it would not have come from us. It's not our style to do that sort of thing. But what's clear is Elon Musk is somebody who is, I don't think there's any doubt anymore, he is the greatest entrepreneur of all time.
Indeed. Is he
he's a big advocate for free speech. Well, let's see. Look, he's clearly been very clear in his endorsement.
He might be giving you $100 million.
Well, who knows? Who knows what Elon might do in the future?
What conversations have you had? Tell us. How much money is he giving?
I have not had any conversations myself
Who's he been speaking
with
to Nigel?
Elon Musk. Yeah, of course, Nigel has spoken with him, but that's partly because Nigel is, in my view, the man who is closest to the incoming president of the United States. Elon Musk played a crucial role in getting him elected, and Elon is obsessed with ensuring that the values that we care deeply about, things like freedom of speech, for example, persist, and that's why the X platform was so important. It's why he bought it, and it's why he supports us.
All right, I'm really interested in this because I think it could be transformative for Reform's fortunes. So, what's the probability that Elon Musk is going to give you tens of millions of quid?
I can't price that probability because I have no idea. You'd have to ask him about that.
But is it pie in the sky? Is there something in it? Is there definitely something in it?
I think, given he is worth $460 billion, he owns many companies, and he could not have been clearer on social media, very clearly, that he's endorsed Nigel. He thinks reform government is necessary to turn this country around and to save it. He has a huge soft spot for Britain, just like President Trump does. I wouldn't be surprised, but to be clear, I'm not speculating on a donation. I'm not in touch with him about that. It would be inappropriate for me to do so.
All right, so more likely than not to give you a wedge of cash.
I'm not going to say that. As I said, he supports Nigel. He's an extraordinarily wealthy man. We would welcome a donation from him, but that's up to him.
All right, if he does give you some money, you can come on GB News and tell us all about it.
All right, I will.
Zia Yusuf, thank you very much indeed for joining me in the studio this morning.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, very good evening. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Hope you have had a good evening, although we have started to see a band of rain push its way into northern and western areas of Scotland. Some quite squally winds around this evening. As this continues to move its way in, it will turn quite persistent for western areas of Scotland, in particular the Highlands, seeing a lot of rainfall during this forthcoming night. Generally drier further towards the south, but quite a lot of cloud around. Blustery still in amongst all of that. Most southwesterly winds filtering in, some quite mild air, so most of us will hold up around 9 or 11 degrees degrees Celsius as you start off Monday morning. This rain band will still be in place throughout much of the day on Monday, and so really we will see those rainfall totals really tossing up, potentially half a month's worth of rain quite widely across areas of western Scotland. Snowmelt as well underneath those mild temperatures will provide further flooding impacts in places as well, so do take care, and a rain warning is in force. Generally though, for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales as well, we will hopefully start to see the cloud break up a touch more compared to what we have seen today, and so more of us should see some of those brighter, maybe even sunnier spells developing at times over the course of the day. We do still have that brisk wind around in places though, still coming in from that southwesterly direction, so temperatures around 9 to 12 degrees Celsius once again, even by day, but that blustery wind will just take the edge off the feel of things a touch when you are stepping outside at times. Into Tuesday, we've got another area of low pressure that is going to be moving its way in, steadily pushing its way in from parts of the southwest. Again, this will be bringing some further strong winds, particularly gales around coastal areas in the west, but also further bands of rain, potentially heavy at times, perhaps mostly affecting Northern Ireland, and then steadily pushing its way into Scotland, England and Wales. Still the risk of some showers around, but you've got the greater chance of seeing a few sunnier or brighter spells in there at times. Still though, those strong winds coming in from the south going to field in those milder conditions, but a change in wind direction later in the week means